Hi, this is Jim of Shiloh Hall with part two of a work I've entitled The Resurrection in the New and the Old Writings. In part one, we addressed the timing and the substance of the resurrection in that we find in the new writings. In this video, I hope to, although they don't use in the old writings the word resurrection, the concept is there, and probably before Messiah, the word resurrection was probably being used, just not in what we find as the scriptures or the old writing. Um, and so I hope to draw that parallel and show you both that how it existed, or the way it is spoken of in the new writings and the way it's spoken of in the old writings, but that the two are the same. The timing is the same. The substance is the same. Paul reveals to us that the substance will be that of spirit, and the old writings in the old writings we're going to find what that the characteristics of that spirit being will be. Uh, but before we get started, I do want to address, I haven't fully reviewed the first video that I did, but I noticed early on the way I phrased something, it came out other than what I would want it to come out. In no way do I believe that we attain the resurrection by keeping Torah or by obedience. We attain the resurrection. We become worthy of attaining that age, as shared in Luke, only by the work of Messiah, and faith in Messiah. Messiah earned the resurrection. We cannot. We're not going to be able to keep Torah in any satisfactory manner. Not while we're in our flesh. We're not going to be able to keep it in any satisfactory manner that would cause us to be found worthy of um, the resurrection. In fact, our actions, even the best of our actions, is still worthy of the punishment of death. But that punishment of death is exactly what he bore for us on our behalf. And that's what Yahuwah the Father has accepted on our behalf, and then offered us the resurrection. Messiah won as a gift if we will receive and believe on Messiah. And that belief, that faith, leads to obedience, and the obedience is, you know, obedience to Elohim. And obedience to Elohim, how you do that is found only partially in the new writings. Where we need to turn to learn really the ways of Yahuwah are to the original writings, the writings that the early church had. And so I just wanted to cover that and clarify that before we got started here into part two. So in part two here, I don't really want to try to build the case that I did in the Hope of Yisrael video. I just want to quickly summarize and state that Israel, a couple thousand years after creation, when they had formed as a nation, they were given their laws, and then the blessings and the curses. Depending upon what they did with their law and with their covenant, they would either experience blessings or experience curses. And it was prophesied that they would experience cursing because they would break covenant, and they did. And so I'm going to be going through a number of passages here: Deuteronomy, Jubilees, and Enoch quickly. But all of these will be these will they'll be prophetic, because they'll be offered and spoken of this turning away, and uh, the dispersion and the being cast out and being scattered throughout the world is prophetic at the time of those writings. But by the time of Jeremiah and Isaiah and Micah and Hosea, by those times, um, uh, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom were already gone and scattered and dispersed, and um, so it had already happened by that time. So let's just let's just summarize here. Israel is judged and removed from their land for breaking covenant and sin. They are scattered into other lands and throughout the world. And the 10 tribes of Israel, the northern kingdom, were scattered in the days by the days of Messiah. They were scattered around 722 BC, never to come back to the land. In fact, the inhabitants of was the northern kingdom really were from Assyria primarily. Um, and they were scattered in the days of Mosiah. The 2 tribes of Judea in the southern kingdom, they experienced a partial dispersion. I think in many ways we think of the Babylonian captivity as dispersion, and in a way it was, but not all the people left the land of Judea and went to Babylon. And then not everybody went to Babylon, came back, but effectively the 2 tribes were in the land of Judea at the time of Messiah. So even though they had experienced, potentially, I guess you would say they had experienced a partial dispersion, they certainly experienced captivity. But in the days of Messiah, they were back in the land. Now, they did experience the complete dispersion by AD 70. From the days of Messiah up to AD 70, they began their migration, their dispersion primarily to the south and into Egypt, according to what I've come to understand and believe. By AD 70, when Rome came in and destroyed Jerusalem, at that point in time, they were all dispersed. So by now, they are all dispersed. So all in the days of Messiah, the 10 tribes were dispersed. These days, all of the tribes remain dispersed and not identifiable. I will not address in this video, what may or may not be happening in the land of Israel today, but it is not the gathering together that is represented by what we're going to go through here now, because it's just not broad enough. At best, it's not broad enough. It does not include the other 10 tribes. It would be the Jews, and Judeans. The regathering that we're talking about will be a very specific event, and it is not the one that has happened so far. So what we're going to be discussing in this video is not the scattering. Again, I'm not going to rebuild that case, but I am going to restate the regathering. The regathering of Israel, because I believe that is the regathering we see in Matthew 24, when Messiah comes on the clouds and sends his angels out to gather his elect from the 4 winds. That is the gathering together of Israel that I believe we are talking about in these various passages of the old writings. And we do get some guidance that it happens in the day of Yahweh, which we know is end of time. And we get some guidance that the gathering comes at that time too. But the tying together of the day of Yahuwah with the judgment of the world and the beginning of that last day and the regathering, we can tie all those together via Matthew 24. Let me so I'm just going to say that we're going to find in the old writings here that the gathering does also take place in the day, at the beginning of the day of Yahuwah, which is also the beginning of the last day, same as it did in the New Covenant writings, and that's what I hope to show you here. And I think I'd like to start with just doing a word search of the day of Yahuwah so that we can see where it comes up, how often it comes up, and in what context it comes up. Because, and in this word study we're getting ready to do, we're going to see what the day of Yahuwah is. Let me just get started here. So, day of Yahuwah, I've started at the beginning of the Yah scriptures and did a word search on day of Yahuwah, and it came up with 23 passages. The first one it comes up with is in Isaiah, Yeshayahu, and it says, "How, for the day of Yahweh is near. It comes as destruction from El Shaddai. See, the day of Yahweh is coming, fierce with wrath and heat of displeasure, to lay the earth waste and destroy its sinners from it." So we know that as, depends on what vernacular you want to use, but what the Great Tribulation, It is the day when um, the Lord, in Christian terminology, the Lord comes back and destroys the earth. It's the bowl. It's Revelation. It's the bowl judgment. So and the trumpet. It's just the destruction of Yahweh on the unbelieving world. And so you're going to see it here in the Old Testament, laying this out, this prophetic day of the Lord that is forthcoming, and calling it near, but near as in the seventh day. And at this point in time, they're in the third day. So, all right. So there are two passages in Yeshayahu or Isaiah, and here's a passage in Ezekiel. You have not gone up into the breaches, nor do you build a wall for the house of Israel to stand in the battle on the day of Yahweh. Let's go to the next one here. This is in Ezekiel also. For the day is near, even the day of Yahweh is near. It is a day of clouds, the time of the nations. The sword shall come upon Mizraim, and great anguish shall be in Cush when the slain fall in Mizraim, and they shall take away her wealth, and her foundations are broken down. So it's a day of punishment by Yahweh. And here is Joel or Yol. Alas, for the day of Yahweh is near, and it comes as destruction from El Shaddai. And another passage in Joel, blow a ram's horn, or we know it as blow a trumpet in Zion usually, but blow a ram's horn in Zion and sound an alarm on my Kodesh mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the earth tremble, for the day of Yahweh is coming, for it is near, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds, dense clouds, like the morning clouds spread over the mountains, a people many and strong, the like of whom has never been, nor shall there ever be again. Go to the next passage here. Again in Joel, and Yahweh shall give forth his voice before his army, and for his camp is very great, for mighty is the doer of his word. For the day of Yahweh is great and very awesome, and who can bear it? And here is the passage in Joel, in verse 30, and I shall give signs in the Shemaim and upon the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun is turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh. And this is Joel again. Crowds in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. Sun and moon shall become dark, and the stars shall withdraw their brightness. So this is clearly tying the day of Yahweh to what we saw in Matthew 24, when after the distress of those days, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from the sky. This is in Amos. Woe to you who are longing for the day of Yahweh. What does the day of Yahweh mean to you? It is darkness and not light, as when a man flees from a lion and a bear shall meet him, or enter his house, rested his hand on the wall, and a serpent shall bite him. Is not the day of Yahweh darkness and not light? Is it not dark, very dark, with no brightness in it? And then this is in Obadiah, for the day of Yahweh is near upon all Gentiles. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reward shall come back on your own head. And this is Zephaniah. Hush, the presence of Adon, Yahuwah. For the day of Yahweh is near, for Yahweh has prepared a slaughter, his Kadesh one. He has Kadash his invited ones. Near, and this is Zephaniah again. Near is the great day of Yahweh, near and hurrying greatly, the noise of the day of Yahweh. Let the mighty man then bitterly cry out, that day is a day of wrath, a day of distress and trouble, a day of waste and ruin, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds, dense clouds, a day of ram's horn and alarm against the walled cities and against the corner towers. And then is this Malachi? Malachi. See, I am sending you Eliyahu the Nabi before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh. Okay, so this is beating it into the ground that this day of Yahweh that does, in fact, I'm actually, let me just go forward here because you're going to see that it's spoken of over and over again. Um, in the new writings, here's Acts. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and splendid day of Yahuwah. Now, this is Peter quoting Joel. And in Thessalonians, for you yourselves know very well that the day of Yahuwah comes as a thief in the night. This is Second Thessalonians. Not to become easily unsettled in mind or troubled either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as if the day of Yahuwah has come. But the day of Yahuwah shall come as a thief in the night, in which the Shemaim will pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with intense heat, and the earth and the works that are in it shall be burned up. The sun and the moon, similar to the sun being dark and the moon not giving its light, and the stars falling from heaven, there will be great chaos and commotion. I came to be, now this is John in Revelation, I came to be in the Ruah, which is a spirit, on the day of Yahuwah, and I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet. So what I'm attempting to do here is to, for those who maybe are not familiar with the day of Yahweh, make sure you know that there is a day of Yahuwah, and that day of Yahuwah is the recompense, and it's to this unbelieving world, wicked world, and it begins at the end of the sixth day, and it is the beginning of the seventh day. And that day of Yahweh ushers in, the first thing it does is, we're going to see a sign in the sun, moon, and stars, and then we're going to see Yahushua coming on the clouds with power and great glory. And we're going to see the angels go and gather up from the four corners of the world, according to Matthew, according to the Messiah, in the four corners of heaven, according to Matthew, but the four corners of the world and the four corners of heaven, or something like that in Mark, earth and heaven. The point is, from everywhere they are, the angels will go and gather them and bring them together. And that happens at the first day of the first thing, right after the sign in the sun, moon, stars, and right as Yahushua comes on the clouds. The gathering takes place at the day of Yahweh. And then following that, as we get captured away and are caught up together with Messiah in the air and taken out of the way, then the judgment, the wrath of God, the wrath of Yahweh, the wrath of Yahuwah comes to earth, and devastation follows. Okay, so the day of the Lord establishes the timing, and that was the goal of what I just took you through. Is the timing is the day of the Lord. Now I want to move to really what this gathering is. In Matthew 24, if you are a subscriber to the pre-tribulation rapture, you really have no context for this gathering that Messiah is talking about when he says he's coming on the clouds in that beginning of the day of the Lord, when he's coming on the clouds and gathering people. Well, there's no church left to gather because everybody would have been raptured before the great distress, before any of this timing. So in the pre-trib rapture picture, there's no context for that. You have to invent something. There's no context for who's going to be gathered, who the elect is that gets gathered at that time. Now, if you are not a subscriber to pre-tribulation rapture, then you know that the church, the elect, those who have joined Israel, if you follow what I subscribe to, the church is not a separate entity that introduced this concept of elect and chosen ones. No, the elect and chosen ones are of Israel, going all the way back to the days of Israel in the original covenant. And so this gathering that Messiah is speaking of in Matthew 24 is the gathering of Israel that has been scattered throughout the world, uh, that is the same gathering. It's the same event. So when we go to the old writings and we see that Israel, whom has been scattered amongst the nations, when they turn their heart back to Elohim, which is a constant theme, and then it seems like that's a preparatory thing that all of us that are truly chosen are going to, in the days when just before the gathering, we're all going to be turning our heart to seek hard after Yahweh in that moment. And then the gathering is going to happen. There's going to be a gathering of the elect from the four winds, from wherever they were. And you're going to see this in the old writings, gathered from wherever they were, just like in Matthew 24, and brought back. And then at that time, and then we're going to see, not only is that the gathering, but then at that time of the gathering, then these old writings are going to share what will be taking place, because we know that that's the resurrection, that's the rapture. So in that moment that we are gathered, we are changed, and we are changed into our new spiritual being at that moment. So in all of these passages I'm getting ready to go through, upon this regathering is the change and into a spiritual being. And with the change into the spiritual being, you're going to see the characteristics that follow. So, all right, let me start with Deuteronomy 30. And, uh, and it shall be, well, first of all, just in 29, it says up here, they've been uprooted, uh, and they've been cast into another land. Um, and so in Deuteronomy chapter 30, and it shall be when all these words come upon you, the barakah, which is the curse, I'm sorry, the blessings, and the curse which I have put upon you, and you shall bring them back into your heart among all the Gentiles where Yahweh your Elohim drives you, which is the status that we're in today. We've been driven amongst the Gentiles, and shall turn back to Yahweh your Elohim and obey his voice according to all that I command you today with all your heart and with all your being, you and your children. So this is that turning back, that preparatory work, I believe, before the gathering, because then in chapter 3, then Yahweh your Elohim shall turn back your captivity from wherever you are, and shall have compassion on you, and he shall turn back and gather you from all the peoples where your Elohim has scattered you. If any of you are driven out to the farthest parts under the Shemaim, from there Yahweh your Elohim gathers you, and from there he takes you. And your Yahweh your Elohim shall bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and shall do good to you, and increase you more than your fathers. Now, does not that not sound like Matthew 24 when he says, and he shall send his messengers to the four corners of the world to gather his elect, and then we will be captured up and brought up to where he is, and will forever be with him in the clouds, which is, I believe, the land, because the land that we're promised at that moment is either in heaven or between heaven and earth at that time, and that's where we're gathered to. Is Deuteronomy not 30 not, or is Deuteronomy 30 not similar in its makeup to Matthew 24? And then once we've been resurrected and gathered, the resurrection has occurred. We've just been gathered. And now what takes place in our being? Well, first of all, we become spirit. We become of the Shemaim. We give up the earthy nature, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, and take on the spiritual. And when we take on the spiritual, what happens? Yahweh your Elohim shall circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, so that you might live. And Yahuwah, well, we won't go on from there. And so now we turn to Jubilees, chapter 1. And I will not, in the Hope of Israel, we went through the scattering and what takes place in the judgment up here. But for our purposes today, we're going to go to chapter 1, verse 15, which parallels what we just read in Deuteronomy. And also Jubilees is occurring. This letter, this writing is being given to Moses at the same time that he is being given the the law, up in Mount Sinai, and probably predates Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy is a bit of a recap. This actually probably occurs prior to Deuteronomy. But in verse 15, and after this they shall turn to me from among the Gentiles with all their heart and with all their being and with all their strength. Okay, so there it is again, some sort of preparatory work where we, those of us who are his, the chosen and elect, begin to turn toward him in preparation, because then he shall gather them, which is us. I shall gather them from among all the Gentiles, and they shall seek me, so that I shall be found by them, when they seek me with all their heart and with all their being. And shall reveal to them great peace with righteousness, and I shall plant them in this land in truth with all my heart and with all my being, and they shall be for a barakah and not for a curse, and they shall be the head and not the tail. So we turn to him, and then he gathers us. And in that whole event, probably just before the gathering and at the time of the gathering and at the time of the resurrection, there's just this whole thing where we're really turning to him in a way probably that none of us have been able to successfully, as much as we want to. We've not really succeeded in turning to him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. But I think it's um, interesting that he says he gathers them from among the Gentiles, from wherever they've been scattered, from the four corners. I'm going to add to this. I believe he says that later, but it doesn't really matter. He draws us and gathers us from the four corners. I think it's interesting that he also, um, let's see, I shall gather them from among all the Gentiles, and they shall seek me, so that I shall be found by them. When they seek me with all their heart, I'm sorry. What I really wanted to say is, just because I think it's so worthy, and I just think it's so wonderful that when he gathers us, he's going to reveal to us great peace with righteousness, and he will plant us in this land, which I believe is the New Jerusalem, either in heaven or between heaven and earth right now, but that's where we're going to go upon the gathering. And it's with his whole heart and with his whole being that he will be working toward us. It's not just us loving him with all our heart and all our soul and with all our being. It's him loving us with all his heart and with all his being. Is that not cool? And they shall be, I won't say that again. And then I shall build my mikdash in their midst, which is my dwelling in their midst, and I shall dwell with them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. That we saw that in the new writings, but here we are seeing it again. We're going to see it in the rest of the passages as well. This theme that upon the gathering and upon this spiritual resurrection, where our fleshly being takes on spiritual being, well, we will successfully be his people in truth and in righteousness, and he will be our God. And he will not forsake us nor fulfill us, for I am Yahweh their Elohim. And then, as I shared with you before, Moses falls on his face because he knows they're going to be, he heard that what all is going to befall them before it befalls them, and he's hoping that it doesn't happen. But Yahweh's response to Moshe is, I just know they're stiff-necked and they're unruliness, and they just are not gonna, they're not gonna be obedient until they confess their own sin and the sin of the father. So basically, they're not going to succeed. And sorry, Moses. And then, but he does affirm to Moses again that after this they shall turn to me in all uprightness, with all their heart and with all their being, and I shall circumcise the foreskin of their heart. So at this time of gathering, as we are turning to him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So this is, my point would be, and the reason this is evidence to me is that this is at the gathering, and at the gathering is occurring at the day of Yahweh. And the gathering at the day of Yahweh is the resurrection. And we know that when we receive the resurrection, we put off the earthy and put on the Shemayim, we put on the Spirit. So all of what's happening here at this time of gathering, and as we're getting ready to go in, I'm confident this is a description of our spiritual being and how it will be different than what we know and experience in this fleshy being, this earthy being. And so I'll just read here. I shall circumcise the foreskin of their heart and the foreskin of the heart of their seed, and I shall create in them a Kodesh spirit, and I shall cleanse them so that they shall not turn away from me from that day unto eternity. So in this resurrected body, the skin, the flesh is going to be cut off. He's going to create in us a kodesh, a set apart spirit, and he's going to cleanse us so that whatever he's going to do, the mechanics of this, whatever he's doing, it will be such a body and such, when we receive our spiritual being, it will be such a body that we will not turn away from him from that day unto eternity. We will not have sins separating from us from him again. And their being shall cling to me and to all my commands, and they shall perform my commands, and I shall be their father, and they shall be my children. So in this new spiritual being, our being shall cling to him and be able to and willing to and will perform all of his commands. And he shall be our father, and we will be his children, and they shall be called children of the living Elohim. And every messenger and every spirit will know, even they shall know, that these are my children, and that I am their father in uprightness and righteousness, and that I love them. And so now we turn to Enoch in chapter 5, and verse 7 here. But for the elect there shall be light and joy and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. Now, in Enoch, and let me also set the stage. Enoch predates Jubilees or Deuteronomy. He predates Abraham. I mean, he goes back to he begins his life in the middle of the pre-flood era. What is it, 500 or 600 years in? And he was a righteous man, the only righteous man. I mean, he was such a righteous man. He walked with Yahweh and ended up being taken up into heaven. And so he's writing here, but for the elect there shall be light and joy and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. And again, you don't see the language of the gathering here, but you do see that they are inheriting the earth. This is the time that of prosperity when these blessings occur. Maybe I'm reading in too much, but I don't think so. I think it's pretty clear that this is that season when we are being resurrected, brought back to the land, and inheriting all good things. So let me just read 7 again and keep going. But for the elect there shall be light and joy and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. And then there shall be given wisdom to the elect, and they shall all live and never again sin, either through wickedness or through pride. But they who are wise shall be humble, and they shall not transgress again, nor shall they sin all the days of their high, nor shall they die of anger or wrath, but they shall complete the number of their days of their high. And their lives shall be increased in peace, and the years of their joy shall be multiplied in eternal gladness and peace all the days of their life. How is that not the resurrection, which would also place this at the time of the day of the Lord, at the beginning of the seventh day? And here are the characteristics of that body that lives forever now. It will be given wisdom. So we will be given wisdom, things that we are all hoping for. Boy, we really want to ask Yahweh, what happened here and what happened? We just have so many questions, do we not? Well, we're going to be given wisdom. The elect will be given wisdom in that day, and we will live eternally, and we will never sin again. Our body will know Torah. We will not disobey Yahweh. We won't even want to. Won't, doesn't really matter. We won't sin again, and we don't want to. And so again, in 9, he says, again, just affirming, we're not going to transgress again. Never again do we transgress, nor shall we sin all the days of our high, nor do we die any longer. So that is the resurrection body. And the characteristics, again, of that resurrection body in Enoch is that there's wisdom, no more sin. We will not struggle with sin. We will not transgress again, and we will not die of anger and wrath, and we will live forever. And so now we turn to Jeremiah, and I will just say that this concept of gathering is it covers 2 or 3 chapters, 2 chapters, I believe it is. It's a span where he's describing in great detail what it means to be gathered back into the land. But he does offer some summarizing words here in chapter 31, verse 8. See, I am bringing them from the land of the north and shall gather them from the ends of the earth. Same language as Matthew 24. Sends out the messengers and gathers them from from the four corners of the earth and the four corners of the heaven. Among them, the blind, the lame, those with child, and those in labor together, a great assembly returning here. And here in verse 17, and there is expectancy for your latter end, declares Yahweh, and your children shall return to their own country, which is the New Jerusalem. It's the new land that ultimately does come back down to earth, not immediately, but does come back down to earth and lands in the same area that their fathers, the promised land of their father. And then the concept, I'll also say that there's in Deuteronomy and Jubilees there were, and yeah, in Deuteronomy and Jubilees there was this concept of people turning, the chosen ones turning their heart back to Yahweh with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. Well, there's a little bit of that here. They don't say it the same way in Jeremiah, but basically here in 18 he says, I have clearly heard Ephraim lamenting. Ephraim is Israel, the 10 tribes. You have chastised me, and I was chastised like an untrained calf. Turn me back, and I shall turn back, for you are Yahweh my Elohim. For after my turning back I repented, and after I was instructed I struck myself on the thigh. I was ashamed, even humiliated, for I bore the reproach of my youth. That is, to me, I think, and I think it's reasonable to see that as that moment in time, and really the way it will be for people as they begin to turn their heart back to Yahweh, their Elohim, in the end days. And then we get to, we'll just go on down to the new covenant that is made. Now, this new covenant in verse 31 is spoken of in Hebrews. It's, the church knows it from the new writings, but the new writings refer us back to here. And to understand the new writings, you have to understand these old writings, which then give you perspective for the new writings. But we'll start in verse 31 when he says, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah. I'd like to first point out that that covenant, this new covenant, is not with a separate entity called the church or a group of people that is not Israel. The covenant, this new covenant, whether we're living in it now or it's future, which I believe it is future, either way, the covenant is with Israel and the house of Yehudah, which you understand in the days of Jeremiah was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. It's not with a different entity, and it's not like the original covenant that they had with their fathers that took place at Mount. I don't think it's Sinai. It's a different mount. But when the covenant was given them, this new covenant is not like that covenant. That that old covenant that they've made with the fathers, that's what will be passing away when the new covenant comes. And this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts, and I shall write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. So I'm confident that this is, first of all, we've just gone through the gathering. They've gathered, and so this becomes the resurrection time. After those days, after the days of having been scattered, after those days, and upon the gathering, that's when the new covenant becomes in effect, and it happens at the time of resurrection, and not really before. And he makes this covenant, and here's what the covenant looks like. And I believe this is at the resurrection, and this is the spiritual body that we're resurrected into. Once we have passed from the earthly body of flesh to the spiritual body of the Shemayim of spirit, this is what will be taking place. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. So is this not like Enoch? Is this not like Jubilees, where they're sharing that when we receive that resurrection body, that we're going to have Torah written in our inward parts? We will no longer be dependent upon the letter of the law, because we're going to know it's going to be written on our inward parts, and we will not sin going forward. From the moment of our resurrection forward, we will not struggle with sin. And the reason we won't be struggling with sin is that we're cleansed according to Jubilees. And the Torah is written on our heart and in our inward parts. And we know this is end times also because this is the time when Yahuwah has come back and nobody argues anymore. Nobody says, no longer shall they teach each one of his neighbor and each one of his brothers, saying, know Yahweh, for they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yahuwah. For I shall forgive their wickedness and remember their sin no more. So this is the completion. This is when those things that are happening in part give way to happening in full. And now we turn to Ezekiel 36. And we could read chapter 11 where it speaks of the scattering and the regathering, but we won't. We'll stay here in chapter 36, where in verse 24, Yahweh says, and I shall take you from among the Gentiles, and I shall gather you out of all the lands, and I shall bring you into your own land. Again, I ask, is that not the gathering of the Gentiles, or the moment of Matthew 24 when the angels are sent forth to gather the elect from the four corners of the world and bringing them back to their own land, gathering from amongst the Gentiles? And if that's the case, then in that moment, as they've been gathered, that is also the resurrection. And then this is what follows. And according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, I believe this is when they put off the earthy, the flesh, and put on the Shemayim, the spiritual. And in that moment of resurrection, in verse 25 of Ezekiel, Yahweh says, I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from your idols I cleanse you. And I shall give you a new heart, and put a new spirit within you. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh, and put my ruah within you. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws, and to guard my right rulings, and shall do them. And you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim. There again with that theme. So I believe that it seems to me evident that in this moment that he's describing here, this is the resurrection when he sprinkles clean water on them, and he gives us a new heart. Now, the mechanics of that, I don't know. Puts a new spirit within us. I know there's a discussion about whether or not our spirit has been born again already. I don't know. I don't clearly. Whatever has happened already is not the same thing that's going to happen at the resurrection. Um, maybe we're born again now, and we have our new spirit living within us, and we're just waiting for our new spiritual body, maybe. But what I do know is that whatever's happening here, or what I believe is that whatever's happening here in Ezekiel takes place at the resurrection, and that we're describing this spiritual body that will then, after having a new spirit put within us and the heart of stone removed and receiving a heart of flesh, but I don't think it's going to be earthy flesh. It's going to have to be spiritual flesh, flesh like what Messiah has right now, which is not earthy flesh, but spiritual flesh. And he's going to put his Ruah within you, which I understand. We already have his Ruah within us, but this must be something different. Um, maybe it's the same, only without impediment again. I don't really know, but whatever it is, this is something different than what we're experiencing now. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings and shall do them. Is that not Jubilees? Is that not Enoch? When we get that resurrection body, we no longer sin. He causes us to walk in his laws and to guard his ways, guard his right rulings. And then he calls us, he dwells us, he shall cause us to dwell in the land that he gave his fathers, which I'm saying again, I know this is redundant, but that is the New Jerusalem, Mount Zion, and upon the resurrection, initially when we're caught up with him in the air, I believe we're caught up and go to the New Jerusalem, and while we're awaiting the final destruction and the preparation of earth for that New Jerusalem to come down. And it's going to sit down. It's going to be a big place. It's going to be 1,500 miles squared. It's going to be 1,500 miles wide, 1,500 miles long. It's going to be a very big place, and it's going to come down, and it's going to set in the general vicinity of Israel now. In fact, I believe it's going to sit in the original land that was promised Abraham, that the nation of Israel never fully uh, uh, lived in or took over or won. So I think it'll be the original landmarks that that New Jerusalem will come down to. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for the destruction, we're going up, and we're going to hang out up there. So. Okay, so let me just quickly summarize those various passages we just went through quickly. In Deuteronomy 30, at the day of Yahweh, the regathering in verse 4, if any of you are driven out to the farthest parts of the Shemaim, from there Yahweh your Elohim gathers you, and from there he takes you, and Yahweh your Elohim shall bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And this is the resurrection. This is what it looks like when we put off the earthy and put on the Shemaim, the spiritual, the incorruptible. We're putting off corruption and mortality, and we're putting on incorruption and immortality. And this is what it will look like when it happens. This is one of the characterizations of it, that Yahweh our Elohim shall circumcise our heart and the heart of our seed, to love Yahweh with all your heart and with all your being, so that you might live. So I believe that's eternal life. And at the very least, that when he circumcises our heart and the heart of our seed, we are going to be empowered to love Yahweh with all our heart and with all our being. Okay, Jubilees 1, the regathering in verse 15. And after this they shall turn to me from among the Gentiles with all their heart and with all their being and with all their strength, and I shall gather them from among all the Gentiles, and they shall seek me, so that I shall be found by them. And then the resurrection, the putting off of the earthy and putting on of the Shemaim, putting on the spiritual, putting off the flesh, putting off the corrupted and putting on the incorruption, putting off the mortal and putting on the immortality. Verses 23 through 24. And I shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and the foreskin of the heart of your seed, and I shall create in them a Kodesh spirit, and I shall cleanse them, so that they shall not turn away from me from that day unto eternity. And their being shall cling to me and to all my commands, and they shall perform my commands, and I shall be their father, and they shall be my children. First Enoch, chapter 5, the regathering. But for the elect there shall be light and joy and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. That's a little bit weaker, um, but the resurrection part is not. Here's the resurrection, the putting on of incorruption, putting off the earthy, putting off the corruptible, putting off the mortal, and taking on the Shemaim, the spiritual, the eternal, the incorruptible, the immortal, in verses 8 through 9. And then there shall be given wisdom to the elect, and they shall all live and never again sin, either through wickedness or through pride. But they who are wise shall be humble, and they shall not transgress again, nor shall they sin all the days of their high, nor shall they die of anger or wrath, but they shall complete the number of their days of their high, and their lives shall be increased in peace, and the years of their joy shall be multiplied in eternal gladness and peace all the days of their life. I do want to just, again, this is redundant, but I just want to say here are the characteristics of that spiritual body. We're going to be wise. We're going to be humble. We're not going to transgress anymore or sin anymore, and we're going to live forever. Going back to Jubilees, just to reiterate the characteristics, I already touched on it in Deuteronomy, so I just missed it in Jubilees here. But when he circumcises our heart and the foreskin of the heart of our seed, then he creates in us this Kodesh spirit and cleanses us, so that we do, and here's the characteristics, that we do not turn away from Yahweh from that day until eternity. I'm going to fix this real quick. From that day unto eternity. And their beings, this is the other characteristic, their being shall cling to me and to all my commands, and they shall perform my commands. So once again, in the spirit, in that spirit being, we no longer need the letter of the Torah anymore, because it's going to be written on, well, I guess we're getting ready to go here now. Let me just go there. So here's Jeremiah And the regathering. In verse 30, for look, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall turn back the captivity of my people Israel and Yehuda, declares Yahweh, and I shall bring them back to the land that I gave to their fathers, and let them possess it. And in 31:10, he who scattered Israel gathers him, and shall guard him as a shepherd his flock. And here's putting on the resurrection, when the earthy, the mortal, the corruptible puts on the Shemayim, the spiritual, the immortal, the incorruptible. And this is what it looks like. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. So when we talk about in Enoch and um, Jubilees, this idea that we'll no longer transgress, we'll sin no more. Well, how are we going to do that? We're in our spiritual being within spiritual enablements, and it's the Torah will be a part of us. We do not have to study it like we do now, according to the letter of Torah, where we've got to go read and try to keep track of all the things that we're supposed to be doing. It just won't be a problem anymore, because it's going to be a part of us. It's part of us. It's going to be encoded in us. It's going to be in our inward parts. It's going to be written on our hearts, and we just will. And it'll be wonderful. And we're going to live in such harmony and peace and relationship with Yahweh that we don't, as much as we find the idea of our relationship with the Father now being wonderful, it is not the same way we're going to experience our relationship with the Father once we put off this impediment, this flesh, this earthy, and we move into the Spirit, and He moves His dwelling into us. That relationship of father-child is going to be greater than our current relationship of father-child. Not that we don't have a relationship of father-child, but our current relationship of father-son, father-child is, it just has an impediment. It has barrier. It has sin between us. Although, let me rephrase that. I know sin's been dealt with, but we just have this flesh and the problems of flesh that separate us that will be removed. And that is the great hope and the great promise. And then in Ezekiel, the regathering, and I shall take you from among the Gentiles, and I shall gather you out of the lands, and I shall bring you into your own land. And here's the resurrection. Here's the putting off the earthy. I'm sorry, this is redundant. Putting off the earthy, putting off the corruptible, putting off the mortal, putting on the Shemayim, putting on the spirit, putting on incorruption, putting on immortality. And Ezekiel describes it like this: and I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from all your idols I cleanse you, and I shall give you a new heart, and put a new spirit within you. And I shall take that heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh. And I shall put my ruah within you, and I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings, and shall do them. And you shall dwell in the land, and I shall give the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim. So those mechanics, whatever takes place in that resurrection, it will enable us to walk in His laws and guard His ways and guard His right rulings.